Welcome to Technology Tangents. We get leaders together to discuss the important tech of today and the implications for tomorrow. Our discussions are fun, lighthearted, and frankly opinionated, but hopefully it gives you a sense of what matters, what to pay attention to, and what to ignore. Today, we're going to explore a pivotal question at the intersection of leadership and technology. Who is responsible for AI in an organization? From boardrooms to CEOs, other key leaders, let's unpack the roles and responsibilities of all of these people steering the AI initiatives in large companies today. As always, Jason Goth, our CTO. Welcome, Jason.
Hey, Vincent.
How are you today?
I'm great.
You
Actually, although I may be scratching my eyes now that we're recording, people are going to see me all allergied up because it's been terrible today.
Excellent. So allergied up Jason Goth. Okay, good. And Kevin. How are you, Kevin?
I'm doing great.
All right, guys. Well, let's just jump in. As we've talked about before, AI is not just another tech issue. It's a strategic one. It's a pivotal one. It's a rather complicated, nuanced mess, jar of worms, I don't know, for lack of a better word. And it's, I think, critical that the board all the way down to the people on the ground are really involved in defining what this looks like and how it's going to work. With that said, then who's actually responsible for driving, aligning, and holding the team accountable? So given that it's not just technology, I'll give you a pass to start off, Jason, and I'll kick it over to you. Kevin, What do you think? Yeah, why not? It's not just technology. Come on.
But it's Jason's question.
Well, Jason did ask the question. Okay, Jason.
No, I didn't ask the question. I said a lot of people are asking the question.
Well, I guess he rejected and passed it back to you. So, Jason, what's your perspective? What is going on with AI? Who is responsible? The glares. It's on video now, by the way, so you can't hide your glares anymore, Jason.
I'm not glaring.
People will know.
Yeah. Now, I get asked that a lot, and I sometimes think like, well, I'm not sure I like the question, right? Like, who should own AI? It's like, who should own making the business better, right? And so ultimately I'd say, well, I guess that's ultimately the CEO, because you think about like who should own it, like who should own what, right? There's the strategy of how do we use these tools? Like it may be we use them to improve our customer service or add some new capability to a product, or use it to improve the operations of something, like improve our supply chain, or we do it just to strictly cut costs, like, Klarna did, cutting out a bunch of call center agents. Like, well, so what should we use it for, right? And what are the business goals we think it would help with? That tends to be a strategy question. Like, we should use it for these things and not these things. Then there's governance. Like, well, all right, well, what are the rules for use, right? Rules of the road. How do we use it safely? How do we make sure there's no ethical or, safety or bias issues, or that we are compliant with any type of regulation, right? Those are, compliance and governance questions. There's, all right, for each one of those initiatives that the strategy comes up with, who's responsible for executing it? Okay, that may be, is it a buy versus build decision? Do we buy this thing like Outlook? We buy email services. Do we just buy something here? Well, that probably works for some of those use cases. Do we build something, right? Or integrate something, or buy and integrate something? That's probably an execution question that is really, a more of a technology focused one. So, and then finally, does it work? Like, is it improving things, and does it make things better? Well, those are probably all data questions, right? That the data team would answer. And it's no different if we were going to introduce any other thing into the business. Like, what's it going to be used for? How are we going to manage it? Who's going to implement it? How do we know that it's successful? And so who typically does that? Well, that may be the chief strategy officer for the strategy piece. It's probably there's probably some CISO or head of governance, right? For the governance questions. There's probably the CTO, CIO for execution. There's probably a chief data officer. for the data piece. And, that also, there might also be like what data do we have to even be able to offer it? So I don't see how all of those components of the business aren't involved in rolling it out and getting value from it, which means like, all right, well, who then ultimately owns it is the person that those people report to, which is the CEO. So that's my very long-winded way of saying
I think
the
it's,
CEO.
Yeah. I think it's really good. I mean, you're saying, look, the CTO is pivotal from the technological and infrastructure organizational standpoints, but at the end of the day, it really impacts all facets of the organization. And as such, it's really about fostering collaboration across the C-suite and across the organization, which really falls to CEOs
and the board. And this is where I think it was intrigued when you brought this question up is, a year ago, I mean, as AI, generative AI was coming, into the masses and what we should do with it, it was very much around, hey, where does it go in the organization? How we do with it? Where is it going to impact it? Really everything from excitement to fear to how now we fast forward a few months now in the middle of 2024. And it just seems like this is now a tool that has to be run like anything else. This is how we run our business. Now, we may not have it at the maturity level that we need, but to me, it starts with, depending on the structure of the organization, the CEO, the board of directors, and really around what is the expectation that we're going to be using these tools throughout our entire business, everything from how we run our business, govern our business, grow our business, innovate our business, and the respective parts of our organization are going to have to adapt to these different tools. And so, I think about the traditional board governance of like, how does it impact strategy? I think that's the CEO perspective. How do we think about the ethics and the governance of that, and really the impact to any other, return on investment type activity? That's what the boards are going to be asking, and they're going to want to be able to make sure that the organization is protected, both in terms of your risk of using AI and risk of not using AI. But then I think what's interesting to me as we look now for organizations is that it's really around each of the C-suites, if you will, are going to have to figure out how to incorporate this in their tools. And really, when I look at the CEO, the only thing you can't do as a CEO is not go fast and not have this be completely integrated to what you want to do, which then for me, the question as I was thinking about this, preparing for today, is really around how do we measure success for the different executives that then now have a piece of this, and where we go with that. And that's where I think it's kind of interesting to me now, as we're helping our clients or our listeners think about that.
I think it's really interesting because the thing we hear about all the time, in fact, every time I run a workshop with those CEOs, they leave saying something to the effect of, wow, actually, we're just not going fast enough. I thought we were doing great, but we're just not going fast. We have to go faster. How do we do that? What can we do? If you think about the board specifically, that's sort of their job in general, right? It's really about oversight and governance and making sure the organization is strategically aligned and moving in the places it needs to move as fast as it truly needs to move, because there's just inertia within that organization traditionally. I'm curious, given that, how do you measure is, I think, one of the most critical questions, there's no doubt. But even before that, how do boards actually understand what the impact of the business is? Because I think if you look at boards generally, board of directors generally speaking, they're a bit more seasoned, they're a bit farther in their career, they have leadership experience previously, often other large companies, which means by definition, they're probably not typically at the forefront of this latest, greatest technological wave. So how are they even supposed to get savvy and help push the organizations they're responsible for guiding? Any thoughts towards that?
Well, that's more of a Kevin question. Can I back up before we get into that, though? I do want to have one caveat to my previous answer, though.
No caveats allowed.
No caveats allowed. Well, in the last podcast that we did, we talked about the difference between people that create a technology, like some Oracle who might create a database, and then all the thousands of companies that might implement and use it. My answer is, obviously aimed at the people that would be implementing and using it, not at the creator. So, the OpenAI, Google, sure, the company, Llama or Meta, the companies that are actually creating many of those big foundational models and tools, that the answer is a little different there. But I think for this context, we're really focused on the people using it. So that was the basis of my answer. So all right, now back to Kevin.
Well, by the way,
what do the boards do?
Just fair warning, I'm going to pass it back to you because I am curious. Look, this is not the first technological wave we've ever had. How has it happened in the past? So you
Right.
can think about that. But
Sure.
go ahead, Kevin.
Well, one thing on the boards, and maybe interesting for us to think a little bit around the different types of boards, right? Where you have corporate public board, what their expectations are, what their fiscal, really fiduciary responsibilities are. Then really from a private equity, a more innovative startup, I mean, probably different elements of that. Or my view, most boards really are trying to protect, would be what I would say. And trying to protect the status quo, make sure the company is not going to do anything too radical. And I would actually challenge right now, boards need to be more aggressive, and they need to be requiring that that the teams that they're overseeing, the CEO, those leaders that are actually more aggressively incorporating AI into what they're doing. If we look at the themes we've talked about over the last few months, comparing this to internet, cloud, mobile, whatever it is, and where we think this is and how we think this is a more radical change than potentially those previous technical steps, well, then boards need to be more aggressive in making sure that their teams are fully adopting that, whether that be in terms of how that fits out into their product strategy, customer strategy, whether it be in terms of how we think about talent, how you think about cost efficiencies. So really all the same themes that it takes to run your business. So Jason, very much agreed with you. But how you do that, and then really one of the things that's I think key for board is to make sure that they're authorizing the funding required and really enabling executive teams. I think it's probably one of the biggest things the CEO or the board in this case can do is really, in a world where it's really hard to understand what it's going to cost, what the implications are, things that, again, themes we've talked about previously on this podcast. I think right now the time is to be more assertive in that. And no, you have to have fiducial and ROI responsibilities, but the risk of going too slow is probably a greater risk than actually overspending at this point.
Yeah, it's interesting. I hear, and I have used some of those examples like mobile and cloud, but I actually don't think those are good analogies because they're not pervasive enough, right? Cloud pretty much is isolated. You can make an argument, is it isolated to the technology group or not, if you think about doing some shadow IT, but it's pretty isolated to the technology group in most companies. And even mobile, pretty isolated to the product and technology groups. Like what web offerings do we have that we now put on the mobile device, or do we build an app? Those kind of things. They don't change the fundamental core of the business. They're more how mechanisms. Whereas I think the example that is probably more relevant here is e-commerce, right? You go back to some of the initial days of e-commerce. We had a sports company that was a client in the late 90s or early 2000s, and we had done a strategy and proposal for them around doing e-commerce and like what that would do relative to their store traffic, and their answer to that was, oh, well, that's like a drop in the bucket of the stores. We're not going to focus on any of that. They're not around anymore. Same for, our always favorite example on here, Blockbuster, right? They're like, oh, no one's going to ever sit at home and stream these things over, stream movies and TV shows over a computer network. So we're just going to keep renting videotapes. And so I think if you look at the internet, specifically e-commerce, and that the kind of ability for user generated content, like as a whole, like that's probably the better analogy of where, of what would change across the company. And so like what has to change for e-commerce? Well, it's not just building technology. It's like, well, how do we, operationalize that? How do we handle returns and into the stores, and how do we handle fulfillment? Right. And what do we open up and have a marketplace, and do we allow people to do other types of products that, we couldn't carry as a store has a physical inventory, and what can we do now that we eliminate that constraint? And so all of those things, right, have to be considered. It pretty much crosses all of the business. And I think that's a better example for AI.
That's good. I would say, just back to that core question, like how do boards get savvy? I mean, education is going to be key. Yep. I think that, look, I think you have to bring people on who understand this as well to this board. I think that's, if you look across the Fortune 500, I just did this exercise the other day. Only less than a dozen boards total have anybody who really has a shot of understanding what this capability will bring to that organization. People, like the NVIDIA CEO or founders of some of these foundational models are on some boards, no doubt. But by and large, most don't have anybody that I look at and say, oh, I think that person's really going to bring that perspective. So they don't think it's smart. And so the question becomes, not only is it the board's responsibility, but CEO's responsibility and executives across that org. There are some really good programs coming out now, from B schools that have some executive training that I'm sure are great and reasonably well contained. But that's going to be the biggest thing. Is just you're going to have to get smart. You're going to have to really push the bounds of what you can do today. I also think that to your point of now metrics, you're going to have to get really good at setting some serious concrete goals and expectations that you can hold your team accountable. So for example, if you don't have an AI strategy written and articulated by, this needed to be done.
Late,
yeah, it's already too late basically. But if you don't have anything today, you need to give yourself a month and you better get that done as rapidly as possible. If you don't have that approved and sort of what are the implications for the budget in that going, that needs to be top priority. And you need to set really aggressive goals with these things because you're already behind, frankly. And so I think there's that. I'll pair that then with, this is also the time that there is so much opportunity and so much value to be had. A, I don't think you're going to overinvest at the moment. And B, I don't think you have to spend that much time on the business case for a lot of these, as long as you can look somewhere and squint and be like, yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of value here. We have a lot of people doing that task. If you could automate even 50% of it, that's a huge value for us. Just pick something and go. Don't waste your time doing really complex analysis, because the spirit of innovation is what's going to dominate at the moment. Yep. It's not a spirit of who can aim the best, measure 18 times and execute perfectly. The space is changing and transforming so quickly that the one who can move the fastest and really continually measure that progress will be the one who wins, I think.
Which I think is where it's interesting around, and why, if you just make the assumption that it is now part of the fabric of how we run, and you think about the different departments. So if you're the CIO, CTO, you're responsible for the tools and how it's going to work, and evaluating models, what that may look like, but very similar to what they're doing for tech capability tools today. If you're the chief data officer, it's really around reporting, analytics, very similar elements of now you're using AI-driven tools or generative AI tools versus regular AI or whatever else you were using before to be able to work through that. You go down the role of a CFO or a COO, it's around operating efficiencies, how you work through that. You go down to HR and talent, how do you do training? So I think what's going to be interesting about that is that I think it's going to very quickly, it's just the sooner companies just have that be part of what the core discipline of that department and the executive already is responsible for. Now it's around AI versus let's spin up a new group. This is now our AI group. Or, I've heard different organizations have used centers of excellence. Well, I'd be curious on where does that fall between centers of excellence for internal usage, centers of excellence for more of, hey, on external, how it's going to change how our customers interact with, how we interact with our customers based on this innovation. So, there's going to be elements of having that, but it's probably going to be within your normal innovation lens. And so I think, I think it's going to be really important then for, when I think about if I was a CEO or advising a CEO, the steps that I would be taking is I want to make sure that the executives in our team are fully adopting it into their day-to-day existing within their teams, whatever that looks like. If you go to a B school class or take a training or just figure it out, go figure it out. I want to be understanding, probably starting to set some pretty strong objectives around, efficiencies or acceleration that's going to occur. Typical cost structures could be applied to that, but it's going to be really around how we measure the progress of what we want to do with that. I think the hardest thing is going to be how things do the traditional ROI analysis, right? Again, we've talked about these themes. It's going to be very difficult for departments to understand how they go about that. Even going back to last week's episode around talent and how that plays out and what you should pay for it. Where should you overpay? But I think that it's going to be important that this is no longer a side project. This is our strategy should be, how are we going to use this to interact and operate? And then that's where I think ultimately the innovation will start to occur. And when you start to see how that plays out and how you can redeploy your assets, whether it be human capital, dollars, tools, whatever it might be, to further expand what you're trying to do. And that's where it starts to get exciting. And then also, I think a role, going back to the original premise, the role of the board, the CEO, is to really protect the organization from adding unnecessary layers of bureaucracy, control, elements of that too that would have the potential to potentially stifle innovation and growth.
Yeah, I think that's good. And I have a thought. It's a bit provocative and maybe it's a terrible idea. So I'm going to do it live with you guys and you can pressure test. What if you were a CEO or a board and you said, look, I need to adopt this. I understand it's going to be foundational fabric of my business tomorrow. I don't exactly know where all of the value is going to come from. My team certainly doesn't know where all the value is going to come from. My board can't tell me where all the value is going to come from. I can find anecdotes here and there. What if you just gave every one of your directs the challenge, the expectation that they cut 40% of costs from the way they do business today? I don't want any degradation in our top line. I'm going to cut 40% of the cost. That's your goal. Figure it out by the end of this year.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I'm not certain what the metric is, but no, but my mind goes similar. Like you have to set down some challenges like that whether it be, we're going to divest or we're going to redeploy or, we're going to accelerate XYZ, but I think it's going to have to be some of those challenges. And, last year at this time frame, it was more around, hey, we need to make sure you understand it, think about it. Well, now it's really around, no, use it. And I think you'll start to find innovators within your company and within your departments that are intrigued by how to use this and how that accelerates what they can do. Whether that's measured in cost or measured in increased productivity, measured in different elements of that. I'd like to think. I know there's a lot of desire.
That's the same though. When you say productivity, do you mean something different than output per unit time, if you will, or person?
Well, the reason why I pause on that or potentially stumble on that, depending on your perspective, is really, I think we're seeing operational efficiencies typically in cost takeout be where most people are going today. Mm-hmm. I would like to challenge a company, if I was running that, to yes, that might be a reality, do things faster, cheaper, but I'd like to be thinking about how that would help us gain more ground and whatever that is. And so it's just really more the redeployment of that.
I'm with you.
Yeah. Let's do twice as much stuff with the same amount of people that we have.
Sure.
Twice as
I mean, I
fast.
guess my point is that if you gave all of your directs, CMO, CTO, chief product officer, whatever you happen to have on your staff, the goal, take out 40% of cost. In my mind, that allows you to, let's say it's 50% to make your math simple, right, Jason? Take out half. That allows you to figure out what do I do with the other half of the time. Either I could save the money and let half my staff go, or more realistically, as they're taking out half, they'll realize there's all these net new growth opportunities that I can now actually invest in because I've freed up the capital. So with no change to my actual cost structure, I can do, again, conceptually twice as much if it were 50%. But that was my thinking. And it's why I give the challenge of take half of the cost out, because you know the business today. You may not know what AI can do, but if I ask you to take out 5%, you may not need to rely on sort of net new foundational technology. If I tell you to take out half, that's a very different way of thinking, right? A factor of 2 is a very different way of thinking, and it requires me to do something very different than I've ever done before, with the expectation that then you have choice, is my thought. So you could redeploy, or you could just save it. I think redeploying is the smart move, by the way. Strategically, you're going to have to redeploy, lest you just become a commoditized business. But
so let's continue to play this out. So I like the challenge. And besides the easy answer of saying, do I need both a CIO and a CTO? I'll just get rid of one. I mean, that's the easy way to save 40% of your costs. But let's say Jason wants to still have a job, so we can't do that. So let's go down.
He likes fishing.
He likes fishing, so maybe he's willing 40% of the time willing to take that challenge. But I'm curious. Now you're the CFO or the COO, and you've been offered that challenge.
Yep.
Well, what do you do? Like, where do you start first? Where do you go into your own team? Where are you going to rely on other parts of your organization? Like, that's actually where we're on the technology side. It can be really interesting, and really it can actually become an enabler of that growth and change within.
Well, that's, you mentioned the center of excellence a minute ago, and I see a lot of people introduce the center of excellence, but that's not what it is. Right? A lot of our clients we've got some center of excellence, but they're basically the keepers of no, right? Like, no, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. And so, like, if that's kind of, that is kind of, I think, elevating the governance. Like, there are some things you shouldn't do, and you should be very thoughtful about what the impacts of doing AI are and how to do it correctly, scale it, and be safe. Don't hear me, not say that. But, like, to put that superordinate to all of the other things, that's not, a good idea. When I see that, they tend to stifle everything, right? And so if that's what your center of excellence is doing, I would urge a rethink of the center, because a true center of excellence is exactly that. It's like, well, I'm in charge of whatever department, finance, I'm in charge of, recruiting or manufacturing, whatever. And I may not necessarily know like what the best way to use these technologies to get that 40% or 50% is. Well, that's where I think the center of excellence idea can come help, is like really help you think through like what are the possible ways to implement that or get those gains or those goals. So if that's what they're doing, they're an enabler, right, to all of those teams meeting those. I do like the idea of the measurable objective, Vincent. But if that's what that team can do, great. If they're out there telling what people that can't do, then you might want to rethink it.
I think it's good. I think part of my challenge then to my team would be, I'm not really accepting any excuses. Full stop. So if you end up with a center of excellence, then they become the knights who say no, I guess in this case.
Yes.
What I would say to them is like, there are
very few people listening will actually get that reference. But
the knights who say me. Yeah, exactly. They think that what would happen if
Sarah's like, I have no idea what you guys are talking about.
It's just a flesh wound.
It is a flesh wound, exactly. Yeah, my point is though, if you really gave them that challenge, that imperative, and they believed you as the CEO, they believed you said that thing and you meant it, even if you don't really mean it, and by the way, I don't think you should really mean 40%. It should, something like that I think is realistic, but it might take them more than the rest of the
So you mean 80%?
Yeah, 80%. No, I think what would happen is they wouldn't get blocked. I mean, I've seen this at some of the organizations I've lived before where there's this really interesting tension between centralized teams and sort of the business or decentralized teams, right? Where in essence, you end up duplicating some work. And again, my belief is, we've talked about this on the pod, is that you should have one foundation of Gen AI that you're building upon for everybody. There's a lot of good value to that. But if you really give them the challenge, like go solve it, or you're fired, or you're in trouble kind of thing, I'll cut your job, to your point, Kevin, right? And that the 40% is saved. Great. I think that center of excellence would quickly learn that they can't get away with that, because nobody's going to leverage them. Nobody's going to use them. And all of these C-suite executives now are telling their boss, the CEO, that in fact, we're not using it because they keep saying no to us. And I think that would change the incentives dramatically. And so I think it would shift that mindset, is my belief. I don't know. Response? Thoughts?
Well, my first response in the Center of Excellence is, it's kind of like, you don't get fired for hiring McKinsey. Well, I don't get fired because I created a Center of Excellence. That's what we did in 2024. Right. And so I think that, but it doesn't mean it's save easy answer. It kicks the can down the road. And I think a lot of companies will do that, and not because of those safety reasons. I think it really becomes back to, I think it's an opportunity for certain departments within an organization to be able to, you really create capabilities that can really help accelerate their growth and expansion within their company. Both, and again, we're mainly, I think, seeking really from an internal perspective here versus externally, how we could use these tools to help expand how we reach our customers.
Well, but if we're being totally honest too, just like a little bit of airing of dirty laundry, right? If in the consulting world, the people who are often writing these strategies for boards and CEOs, they have a very strong incentive to tell you a center of excellence, and it's run by one group, because then they want to go run it for you and get all of the money associated with it, versus being more distributed and have to compete each and every time. So like even at the CEO level, there's a strong influence by the people who are probably helping with some of these strategies to do that.
Well, I would say my answer is like maybe not a center of excellence, but centers, right? So maybe one around how you use internally, maybe one on how you integrate with external products. I think the thing that happens, my grandfather used to say, if you look for a reason to not do something, you'll find it. And I think that's what a lot of the centers of excellence do. They like, oh, well, that could be a problem. That could be a problem. They find a reason to say no. And so I would tend to have multiple, and have them, back to your point, have targets like, hey, you need to help our whatever teams, our digital teams, figure out a way to, increase loyalty, increase average check size 100%, like what technologies, and be more. So maybe I think of them more as centers of innovation than centers of excellence, right?
Well, that's why I love you going down that path, Jason. I think this is been thinking about this, you think about the core business problems you're trying to solve. You know, how do we get this done faster? How do we reach our customer better? How do we get to the next, spend the right advertising dollar in the most effective way? And how do we start to say each of the departments that are asking those questions, how can they work with different groups to think, well, how would AI-related tools help accelerate the answer to that? And I think that enforcing people, whether it be a big mandate like a 40% or whatever, to help drive that, and then, going back to the premise again, what can an executive team or senior executive team do? How do you continue to break down the barriers? We've talked some about costs, it can be talent, but really I think the regulatory element of that, the data security, privacy elements of that, not to ignore any of them, but I think that's going to be another area where we're going to have organizations and leaderships that are going to be willing to either make those investments or potentially take some risk to be able to say, we're not able. We may have to be a little uncomfortable here, so to speak, in terms to work through that. Another thread that we're not to keep on throwing ideas out, but I also think the concept of partnership is going to be interesting right now. Where you may be willing to work with other people that have ideas that are ahead of where you're at. Where do you take that risk to be able to potentially share IP to be able to do that? I think that's what's kind of exciting about right now is that it's almost like the companies that are willing to take the most risk across the whole dimension of their organization are likely the ones that, when we're doing this 2 or 3 years from now, we're talking about as the ones that have won this first round at the age.
Yeah, I agree around there may need to be some calculated risk taking, but I also think that gets, for a lot of industries and in a lot of function, that gets overblown a little bit, right, around some of the risk. And Zach Venduska, who's our CISO, is probably going to come chase me down after he hears this, but and not to say that there aren't issues and risks, but there are ways through them, right? There are generally ways to address those things, and if we address, we can address them, and whether it be security or privacy, there are ways to address those. Now they're hard, and they require some focused effort, and in the past, people have not wanted to deal with that. But I think you're going to have to deal with those things no matter what you do going forward. And so,
in the same way that you have to deal with security and risk of cyber attacks.
Right, exactly.
It's just required. It's now part of the job.
So, I did give the answer of figure it out, but sometimes you just got to figure it out. There are ways to go do these things securely and safely, and we can't accept that. Again, back to your no excuses. I don't think you can accept that as an excuse anymore. And some of them, now maybe there are some that there isn't a cost-effective way to do it. Well, then you might have to take those risks. But I wouldn't just assume that we have to throw all of the privacy security stuff out with the, out with the bathwater because we want to adopt AI. I think you can do both.
Yeah, and what's your favorite phrase, by the way, about ships and harbors and risk or something? Ships are safest. What is it?
Ships are safest when they're in harbor, but that's not what they're made for.
Right. That's kind of our business is, right? We always have to accept risk, and I think at the moment the risk that we're balancing is terrible on the security side, regulatory side. We're seeing huge fines come out for violation of that. On the flip of it, though, is that we're looking at a blockbuster moment for most organizations. So in either case, you end up in a world where you may not be around. And the question is how do you balance this tightrope of moving quickly, taking serious risks because you have to, while mitigating it as much as you can. And so I think that's going to be a bit of a shift in mindset, frankly, from what we've seen today. The other thing I think is worth noting is really it has to be this, everybody's in it together. Every part of our business is shifting. And that leads to this Wild West that ended up with shadow IT to begin with. And so we're back to the sort of core question where we started full circle is, look, every part of the business has to adopt. Every part of the business needs to do it. You need to move quickly and not be too slow. You need to ensure that you're not stuck by one central team blocking the entire company from moving forward. So who's responsible for shepherding that? Does the CEO, do we really believe the CEO will prioritize this above all other efforts? Is that the CEO's job in moments like this, or is it somebody else?
I think it's an interesting question, and really, I think it is ultimately, yes, the CEO's job. The question of how much time do they spend on it versus how much they delegate. And again, every organization is probably slightly different, probably depending on how much the CEO spends internal versus external. But I think it's got to be very clear from coming down from the CEO how it's going to impact your business and how you're going to work through that, what the expectations are. And so I think the more aggressive people are at doing that, the more aggressive that becomes part of the leadership team, the more likely they're going to expand. So that I get so choked up thinking about this.
It's like allergy season in Texas, everybody. Well, I think we talk about the shadow IT thing a lot, but to me,
I think you always punt on it. I think
No,
I bring it
no,
up a
I
lot
don't.
and you kind of punt. You kind
No,
of
I don't
He's
know.
made his 35-year career on shadow IT.
well, I think that shadow IT is it got started, I think, because
With the punch cards, right?
yeah, no, I think it got started because you had historically had a group of historical CIOs that couldn't keep up with the business demand and were very against. They had a lot of we call it not invented here syndrome. Like, if we don't do it and put it in our four walls and go through our process to pick the vendor, then you can't use it, right? And that led to a lot of the shadow IT, which but I think that today's CIOs, CTOs are real savvy. SaaS and external third-party applications are part of everybody's enterprise architecture and roadmap. There's people have shifted in that belief, right? In the not invented here belief. Like maybe too much. I see some people like outsourcing stuff to third parties. I'm like, that seems a little odd. But I think the pendulum has swung back on that with the technology groups. Maybe not everywhere, but at least with a lot of our clients, to where they're very open to partnering with the different business units and working through those kind of SaaS or third party solutions, and making sure that they have the right engagements from a integration, make sure that things are scale secure, they integrate well, they can get the data from it, and it plays well with the rest of the ecosystem. But I don't feel like they have to own people don't feel like they have to own as much anymore in those departments. And so I don't see it. Well, I guess I shouldn't say I don't see it. It shouldn't drive any shadow IT. I think maybe what I'd say is like I think a lot of the technology leaders are open to those third parties, and so it may not be as big of an issue as it has been in the past. How's that?
I think one thing it's going to be, well, I mean, why does shadow IT exist? Well, one point, maybe in the early days of my consulting career, it was already around reporting, right? It was primarily around that, or with certain tools. I think that was more recently, again, I want access to this, so I'm just going to acquire it and buy it myself in some type of environment. I think what's going to be interesting today, I'm intrigued by, the evolution of the private data clean room, having private, ChatGPT type environments like we do now in our firm, and really how the technology side, hey, we give you these tools, you're able to play with them in a safe environment, go after it, do whatever you want to do. Maybe it's going to be around, you're going to have a centralized IT data. It could be from a center of excellence really around, here's the different tools you can use, different ones that we agree, here's how you can access to our data. I mean, I think there's going to be, again, we talk about efficiencies, some of it's going to be jobs, some of it's going to be how we report, but you can start to see some of it's going to be around how do we create environments to really where that innovation can flourish, how you can think through that. And then it's going to be curious for me, where I think we're entering an age where creativity has a chance to flourish in a way that maybe hasn't been seen in a bit. And think about just even around in certain camps with AI, hey, we have to control it. We have to be this, you have to be protected, you got to be scared, you got to be inclusive, you have to be all these different things that are trying to put boundaries on it. And those need to happen in some degrees, but then there's going to be another camp where it's going to be like, think of all those things we can do with it, how we can reach our customers in a different way, how we can imagine products we didn't ever exist, how it can, I was intrigued by this, this idea of, who's going to be helped more or worse or less by AI tools, the most junior technologists that potentially may or may not have a job, or the most senior technologists can use it to accelerate. And well, it's such an interesting question to really think about. Well, I don't know if it's going to grow the lowest skilled person because they may not necessarily need to be around. But I think that's what's going to be fun over the next few years for companies to really explore how they use this. And the ones that are going to continue to evolve are the ones that have that be part of their DNA, and the ones that want to protect themselves or protect their market, I think will continue to go away.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think this is, the quintessential data-driven culture kind of moment for Gen AI effectively. We're finally at a point where we've talked about how businesses that can leverage data in their decision-making strategically, operationally, really do thrive and are consistently outperforming those who don't. I think we're now at the extinction event for those who don't. Those who can't figure out how to be data-driven, those who can't figure out how to leverage it in all the positive and negative ways, and really innovate and really develop net new opportunities for their business are unfortunately going to be the way of the dinosaurs. This idea of mine of using sort of some, BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goal of cutting 40% of the cost is not because I believe the value of Gen AI is actually in cost cutting. I think that is a step that will generate additional incremental funding to go do that truly innovative work. I also think it's a nice mechanism to effectively teach people where is this technology really good, and help develop intuitions that most people and organizations don't have today. I think it's really hard. I always joke that data science is nothing more than domain knowledge and counting, right? The counting might be hard with complex derivatives or whatever, but at the end of the day, it's really the domain knowledge that typically stunts the actual adoption and real value creation of data science. And I think that's true here too. And so what's different now than it was in the past decade is that we're actually taking that data science bit, that AI bit, and we're actually empowering businesses to solve their own problems. And I think that's what's so revolutionary, so transformative, and why I really believe that businesses who don't adopt this very quickly are done. And so I think that's what's scary. And I think it comes down to the boards need to get really serious about holding their CEOs accountable and forcing them to move faster than they're comfortable. I think that it's a moment in time the CEOs need to make their leadership teams a lot more uncomfortable than they are before. Yes, you need to moderate risk. Yes, you need to mitigate it where you can. Yes, you need some governance around it. But truly, you need to light a fire under your entire company and get them moving on this, because it is a big deal. And, this pod, we talk a lot about new technology, and we're usually pretty, how would you describe it, Jason? Not very hypey.
we believe strongly in the Gartner hype cycle, and most things we talk about are on their way up to the the peak of hype and are ready to come crashing down. I think actually it's an interesting point, because someone asked me, why do you feel that there's not going to be this big trough of illusionment? Why do you think now is the time? Disillusionment. Thank you. Disillusionment. But my answer is that because we've been through that 4 or 5 times already with AI, right? And it's gone up and come down, not met expectations, and crashed, and up and crashed, and up and crashed, and we may actually have it right this time. And so I do think that I agree with you. It is going to be game changing in that way. And again, advice to those that think that there'll be just a trough of disillusionment here. I don't think it's the case, because they've already proven, you've seen too many actual real world implementations with massive impact.
Yeah, and again, just like our clients, the reason CEOs are consistently telling me we have to move faster is they start seeing some of the actual results of our early proof of feasibilities, proof of values, and they're blown away. They're blown away by just how quickly and how seemingly easily we're delivering huge savings and huge revenue opportunities for them. It's too powerful.
When we were prepping, or I saw the topic for today, I'm a little disappointed, because I thought one of you guys was going to say there needs to be a chief AI officer I was spoiling for a fight, but now we're all in agreement. It's no fun.
Well, I still think that, I'm up for hire. No, I'm kidding. I'm not really. Yeah, I think this is job security in its making, I suppose. But I do think that boards again, you can tell me how this typically has happened in the past if you have an example, but I do think boards need to evolve the types of people they have. And I think that somebody needs to be representing this, at least in the short term. Maybe it's an advisory role. Maybe it's not in a full-time board position. I don't know. But I think I was pretty blown away when I looked across Fortune 500s and I'm looking at the team and I just don't see anybody who is really going to be bringing that level of thought and sort of instigation to that team.
Well, one that I'm not surprised by that, Vincent, partly because I think if you have that level of knowledge, sophistication, you're probably not wasting your time on boards. You're probably either running your own company, advising, private equity, probably where those executives are. So it's going to probably have to come from an existing part of a board. Could be a technology committee, could be other things that are having to do that, or it could just be simply, it's really around how you really as your overall just basic fiduciary responsibility within the board, how you're going to do that. But that's why I think most likely maybe changing some of the direction. Ultimately, it's really the executive that has to be able to drive that. And one thing that's kind of at least makes me smile when I think about this topic is that it's been a tough 5-6 years, and think about what companies are having to work through with the different conditions that you have to play in, and obviously there's a lot of ups and downs right now as well. But I think if you get past some of the concern and risk and you look at just the pure joy of innovation that AI can bring, that's what's exciting about right now. It's a real problem. It's a growth problem. It's not trying to figure out how to get 80% of your customers working from home. It's not about trying to do that in a safe world. It's not trying to do it through all the many issues that we're dealing with as a society and around different complex themes. It's about how do we innovate and grow and use creativity and do it faster? And that's what's exciting about right now. And I hope that executive teams are excited about this and the potential. Yeah, there's a lot of things to get figured out. There's a lot of things that you have to go do, and there's a lot of realities. There's lives and people that are going to be impacted by these different choices, and that's a reality of business. It's always been a reality of how organizations and how really society evolves. But I think it could be really fun too, and I think that's what's going to be interesting around how much do we not put governors on that really. I mean, I want to be as safe as you possibly can, but how do we not overlay unnecessary burdens for it to do a certain outcome or engineer a certain way? And I think that's going to be really intriguing for us as a society as we work through that, how we think through it, because it's a tool that will accelerate winners and losers, and it's going to be interesting how society allows that to happen.
So to sort of wrap up today, if you think about sort of who owns it across the organization, it's clearly every department is going to be impacted in a different way. Every executive is going to be responsible for using this technology in the not too distant future. It's going to require education, it's going to require change. It's going to require you to start getting serious about what is your strategy if you haven't done that yet. It's going to get you serious about what are your goals and objectives in the short term, this fiscal year, if not sooner. And how you balance the risk of existential just disappearing with the governance, the ethics, the compliance side of it is going to be an ongoing challenge. But really, the CEO needs to start this movement, start this evolution, and boards need to help support and instigate where required. Any other closing thoughts from you guys as we wrap up today? Nothing.
None for me.
That was it.
Well, I was just thinking about how if AI really did its job, how your Tesla would have been saved from the hailstorm.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's really, it all goes back to that.
Look, I do have a funny story, just real quick, a quick aside, then we'll end the episode today. A quick aside. So for those of you who don't know, which I don't think I've mentioned on the pod before. So yeah, I have a Tesla and
Had,
yes, past tense now. We had a hailstorm here in Dallas and it got total. It's just like the hail is insane. It just destroyed the car. Jason has a funny way of putting it, but it destroyed the car. The headlines, I was looking for cars over the past couple of weeks. I wasn't really on the market, so I had to do a lot of work and a lot of research, and I'm just, analysis paralysis, as my wife likes to say. But one of the things I came across was a sales guy who, he's like, oh, what do you do? Oh, AI. I think I've heard of that, like that open chat thing or whatever it's called. And I'm like, oh yeah, the chat GPT by opening it, that thing. He's like, yeah, that thing. My son used that thing. And I was like, oh, cool. He's like, a student at A&M. I was like, that's cool. He's like, no, seriously, it's really cool because actually what he wrote, don't tell anybody. And I won't name the dealership this guy works for just for his own protection. It turns out the way the dealership works is when a new lead comes in their CRM tool, you have to go claim it. And whoever claims, if it doesn't get claimed on your, Salesforce instance or whatever they're using within the first 10 minutes, it goes to the next salesperson. So his son wrote a little script to automatically claim everything. The second they pop up, it claims it. And what you have to do when you claim it then is send a note to the lead within, some number of minutes after that. Otherwise, it'll automatically get bounced back out, so you just can't claim everything. Well, his son not only wrote the script to claim it, but then wrote a script to then call ChatGPT to send a note to the person that's customized to the person with their name, with whatever they put at the info, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's kind of a cool little example where this guy is now claiming a disproportionate number of leads, must be looking like he is online 24/7, responding to people instantly when they come in. Look, I think to the point, that's risky to the company, right? Because that's risky because he probably can't actually follow up with all those leads. Everything that gets to him, he instantly responds to. He can't really nurture those probably. However, from the sake of just innovation, that's a risk worth taking, I think. Having that kind of interaction where somebody could theoretically actually have something of a conversation now with ChatGPT and super unprotected in lots of ways and get to say stuff that probably shouldn't, that's some risk, but I think that the opportunity, the upside of that culture, I think is worth it. So anyway, that was my random aside with.
Mine was going to be your Tesla should have driven itself to a parking garage. It's like, oh, hell coming.
I'm out. Yeah, it was a little bit weird. My wife and I were on our anniversary, and so I couldn't abandon it. And I told her, this is true, by the way. I have a pretty good wife. I told her, like, if all it cost me to stay married for another decade to you is a Tesla, then worth it. It was a good trade to make, because I didn't panic. I mean, inside I did. She doesn't listen to this, so it's fine. Inside I was like throwing a fit.
Not the car.
Exactly. To her, I was like, don't worry about it, babe. It's just hail. It's just a car. It'll be fine. Let's enjoy this date. Let's enjoy our anniversary dinner. This is important. And, then we came out and it was absolutely not like, I knew it was bad when my car alarm went off. We were inside and my car alarm started going off and I got a notification being like, your alarm is going off, which is not a good sign. So anyway, that's that. Thank you guys for joining me today. It was a good conversation. For those who would like to learn more, please visit the insights page at credera.com. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us again. Bye-bye.